quick, honey, new livery just dropped, and it's a banger. And I'm not just saying a regular banger, it's a certified banger. Oh, wait, never mind, it's a movie tie-in livery. No, I'm just kidding, it's still a banger anyway. Oh, Alpine, where was this earlier? Even though Alpine isn't really going to figure all that much probably in the battle for the top 5 places at this weekend's Belgian Grand Prix, they've already won the race when it comes to the best one-off livery of the year so far. Now this being the most obvious collaboration between Alpine and Ryan Reynolds' group of investors after having been the artistic inspiration for Esteban Ocon's helmet last year. This livery is absolutely fantastic. I didn't think I would want to see a red Alpine or I would ever see one, but given what's been going on in the news lately with them, Esteban Ocon's only been seeing red. And of course there's always stuff going on with the power unit, but more about that in a bit. But when it comes to this livery, I am absolutely in love. Everything about this livery is perfect, and it actually makes me forget about all of the trials and tribulations and frustrations that we all had collectively of the A524 being practically all carbon fiber or black, right next to the A424, which was absolutely gorgeous with colour. It doesn't really matter anymore, because what they're going with the Deadpool versus Wolverine collaboration, it's all about black, red, yellow, with the accents and the vinyl wrap making it look like that the colour is being torn through the carbon fibre because we're all wanting to rip all of that carbon fibre off, and then you got the slash, the snick of Wolverine. Keep this livery for the rest of the season, because it's quite clear that they don't really care about weight saving anymore, because this has probably cost a fair bob in terms of kilos, but whatever. They're going to be at the back anyway. They may as well look absolutely great doing it. And yeah, I'm absolutely in love with it. And I've yet to see what the race suits will look like. And I really, really hope that the race suits for Alpine are just like Deadpool's suit, or at least Wolverine's suit, or which one. Maybe one of them is doing one and one is doing the other. That I want to see that. Let me know in the comments if they actually do that. Because up until this point, nothing has been able to top the motif of all of the pit crew of Red Bull that one year being stormtroopers. And it just makes me sad that the BWT logo could have been a flat white all along instead of just being a weird white-blue thing like always. But then again, how are BWT going to say no to Disney when they wish to greenlight a movie promotional tie-in? But hey, this is yet another example of Marvel and F1 working well together, since it was one of the composers of Iron Man 3's soundtrack responsible for the banger that is the F1 theme. You know the one. And yeah, so anyway, this livery, you can throw it onto the heap of classic liveries, including the A521. I still think that is a modern classic. It should be cherished, and the A522 was a travesty. But now we've got to get to another Alpine classic, and that is sacking people, or entities, or basically everything. This time, an entire arm of their organisation, if this rumour is to be believed, and Briatore's purpose for being there does come true. You remember that whole thing about a month or so ago, in regards to the talks of Mercedes that were being fostered by the new Italian hire, Alpine Mercedes? Well, turns out that might actually be happening, and incoming very soon, maybe even next year. And once again, Alpine is now copying all of the homework that McLaren has been doing over the last couple of years, in the sense of dropping the idea of being a works operation, like they did with Honda back in 2017, because, you know, they were going to be a sole works entity, and now going back to a customer deal. But this time, it's slightly different, and it's all the more tragic because the way Renault's been going since the Tobel hybrid era has begun, they've had their moments, of course, with McLaren doing really well with them, especially in 2020, but it's clear that the team needed to change something, and do it fast. And the reduction of the need of the Viry-Châtillon plant might be the next step to getting back on top with Alpine's F1 team, being Renault's main focus, and not having to deal with making engines nobody wants. Okay, I get the decision. It's a fair one. It probably will save them tens of millions of dollars over the long run, and they still get to have a foot in the door in Formula 1. But it would be a crying shame, because it would be the end of a very, very long era of Renault making power units and engines for F1, going back as early as the 70s, nearly 50 years of involvement in F1, from making engines and making the cars go forward very fast, innit? It's a surprising move, but yet it's also not a surprising move given what Renault's been up to, especially with Red Bull and the Abitbull and Horner saga. It's probably better to do this than just slog it out for the sake of nostalgia if nobody's buying your engines. And I bet you that Christian Horner will be extremely happy the last time a Renault power unit crosses the finish line. But speaking about Red Bull and cross, Christian Horner and co are probably very cross, most notably at Max Verstappen. He's been effectively sent to bed early without supper during Grand Prix weekends, with the Dutchman agreeing to not take part in nighttime races anymore. The only reason Max Verstappen took part was because one of the original drivers couldn't make it, and then of course Max Verstappen, this is his team, he felt like he needed to step in, and he was doing them all a solid. So it wasn't an entirely selfish exercise from Max to be getting involved. He felt like he absolutely had to, for the sake of his team, and just be a good sport. And yeah, they ultimately won, so it was well worth it. But after talking with Marco and Horner, Verstappen has said he will not make himself available anymore. But yeah, this being Max Verstappen, I really wouldn't be surprised if he breaks that rule once the media dies down and the heat's off of him. Whilst I understand the importance of sleep, especially in a high-energy environment that is F1, this does feel like Red Bull's maybe trying to deflect some of the issues that they had during the Hungarian Grand Prix toward Verstappen, blaming him for the fact that Red Bull didn't get on the podium, and considering that he was really coming to his team aids Max when they were lacking a driver, this seems really weird and a little bit sad. Whilst this does not excuse the radio tirade one bit, that was still uncalled for and extremely unprofessional, but you know, it is what it is, whatever, Max is gonna do what Max is gonna do. Again, this was not a selfish exercise in doing it because he wants to. He was basically saving his teammates from either having to do longer stints and therefore not perform as optimally and then be even more exhausted, or even worse for him and the team, not compete at all because they would be a man down. It doesn't really feel right to me, and it really feels like the discord that everyone's been talking about regarding Red Bull and Max Verstappen is starting to actually be sensical and somewhat believable. And I respect the fact that Max was willing to talk about this in private. Whether or not he actually heeds that advice remains to be seen, but there was a discussion, there was a conversation, and something came out of it where the parties have agreed to do something for the time being to try and make sure that Max Verstappen is at his best and he gets all of the time he needs in bed. It takes attention away from the real danger that the team faces in their bid to maintain both titles, that their RB20 upgrade, a really big one for Hungary, failed to provide Verstappen the jump he needed to counter McLaren, and especially when Max has a 10th-place grid penalty at the Belgian Grand Prix to deal with, after having to take in a new engine, which had been mooted earlier on in the season and has now come to pass before the summer break. Now, this could go one of two ways. Either all of this extra scrutiny is just not going to bother Max Verstappen at all, like it didn't bother him in 2018 when the whole Crash Stappen moniker really took hold, or it's going to bother him a lot. It really remains to be seen, because the difference is when he was younger, he was still feisty, spirited, wanting to prove things. Now though, there's even more tension with him being a 3-time world champion, and yeah, I know what you're going to say. Max is just not really going to give a hoot about what people think. Fair enough, that is whatever. But whatever happens, this is just yet another thing that Red Bull did not need to deal with. But maybe at the same time, as I just mentioned, it might have been the best thing that Christian Horner could have thought about. That, oh, Max was angry, I'll blame video games, like most mainstream media outlets tend to do whenever there's an opportunity, and David Croft did ad nauseum, and it was just getting absolutely annoying. But in any case, this could be a distraction as he tries to make up for lost places at a track which he does love and has found great success at in the past. And whilst it might be difficult to win the race, I reckon a chance for a podium is still possible. But given that McLaren now undoubtedly have the fastest car at the moment, and they have not had a major upgrade since Miami, and Mercedes has now figured a lot more than anybody would have expected, with Hamilton's spirited defence after taking notes from Alonso's defensive moves to get Ocon the win in 2021, there are a lot more hurdles in the way for Verstappen and Red Bull if they want to come back in the second half of the season and dominate like they did at the beginning of the season before the Chinese Grand Prix effectively. Ever since the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix, there's just been something that's been limiting Max Verstappen from reaching his full potential, and I think there's been a clip from the Talking Bull podcast with Nicola Hume that GP was talking about one of his fears, and what he hoped wouldn't pass, is when Red Bull no longer would be competitive and Max would get on his case. Well, GP, you're a psychic. Come on, Christian, seriously? You're blaming Max for your own failures? Well, just watch this space, okay? Toto will be rubbing his hands with glee a little bit more than usual. Now, speaking of actions, McLaren looks set to be the favourites of the weekend. But the real thought regarding them would be team orders and whether or not they'll rear their ugly heads again, and who would be preferred still being a matter for consideration. With Max relegated to 11th at best after qualifying, this could be a real major opportunity for McLaren to really dig deep and claw back some momentum from Red Bull. Of course, there's the team championship, which is the main goal and priority at the moment for McLaren because, well, there's about 50 points or so between them and Red Bull, and if they can take a huge chunk, especially if Checo has another Mardy in Q1, then this could bring them back to within maybe, say, 30 points, maybe even close to 25. Granted, the whole issue at the Hungarian Grand Prix was that, most likely, McLaren didn't view that the driver's title was actually attainable, and that's already awkward in of itself, that they're just going, yeah, Lando, you ain't going after Max at the moment. Let's maybe focus on the team thing, because right now, Red Bull's only dealing with one driver, and we've got two. Yes, McLaren, you do have two. Two drivers who now have a win apiece. It's all to play for. It's all even Stevens again. So the battle for whoever's going to be the better driver of the two remains to be seen. Oscar, for the fact that he's now gotten down his tyre management much better than it was at the Hungarian Grand Prix in 2023 when it all came to light. Or Lando, when he was just driving the car out of its skin and really setting off the timesheets and really making sure that Oscar Piastri couldn't actually catch up to him before team orders got in the way. It could easily change if McLaren continue to improve and Red Bull keeps on bringing upgrades which either don't make huge leaps or don't work at all. And they've worked okay, but not amazingly, you gotta admit. You would think that this would mean that Norris would be a shoo-in to win the Belgian Grand Prix, well, because, he's been fairly decent in junior formulae, and McLaren being the fastest, it seems to be quite competitive at almost every circuit now, where in recent years, it's had its moments, but not been consistent. But you also gotta consider that in an F1 car, Oscar has been pretty fierce around this track. We've got to remember the sprint last year, and I know it's a sprint race, whatever, tyre management, yuck, 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 but you got to remember, this was the race, the sprint race, when Max Verstappen sat up and took notice of Oscar Piastri and realised, hey, this kid's pretty good. I mean, he went on to win the sprint race anyway, but Oscar was a very spirited second. It turns out that the throttle issues that Lando had before the race started didn't quite eliminate themselves as data would show, thanks to F1 big data. That when changing from first to second gear, Norris had a dramatic dip in acceleration which allowed Piastri to get past, even after Norris defended spiritedly, sending his teammate toward the wall, hoping he would yield, but he did not yield because Oscar is fearless and unflappable. And it's going to be really tight again, and I really wouldn't be surprised if team orders come into play. But hopefully McLaren have learnt a thing or two over the past few days, and maybe they might get a 1-2 without any awkward tension, making me sick to my stomach, and that it's actually a battle, and not getting over the phone and going, please Lando, please let Oscar through, or Oscar, be a good boy and let Lando through. Yeah, there has to be a reason for them to let them through. It's a mechanical thing. No, don't intervene. Let them fight. At least cleanly. Don't crash into each other, because that's just going to be a whole other can of worms. Oh my god. But you know it's going to happen eventually. They are really catching up. Oscar's ceiling is seemingly higher right now. I think you can probably guess who I think is going to be the better of the two, and you might blame bias or something like that, but given what happened last time out, well, depends on somebody giving him €5 or something like that. Now, in regards to the rest of the grid, the main fight will be between Mercedes and McLaren for the win, probably, because Max Verstappen's got to deal with that grid penalty. And of course for McLaren, if they can get a win here after their run of good form, it will be priceless. Because the news is that MasterCard has become a major sponsor of theirs. You know how they say that there are things money can't buy? Well, in this case, there was something that money could buy, so I don't know where I was going with that train of thought. Okay, never mind. As for Ferrari, it's hard to say as downforce will be quite important at high-speed corners, and with long straights, because the porpoising might be an issue. The Kemmel straight, we could see some issues with high-speed vibrations, but at least Hungary had yielded some cause for hope. But I wouldn't expect Leclerc or Sainz to be easy candidates for the top 5 at the moment, especially since they said their next major upgrade is being destined for Singapore, which is about 5 races away. That's a long time. That does mean that most likely, unless they rush parts again, which I hope they don't do because that's what got them into the situation in the first place, that we are not going to be seeing any brand new updates or performance gains other than maybe reliability for the rest of the European leg. And that's not good if they want to try and keep second in the constructors, because Mercedes are catching up and they're bringing upgrades all of the time. So this Singaporean update had better work for the sake of Leclerc's dicky ticker. But hey, hopefully they'll be a little bit mature, that they'll have learned their lesson, and I'll have learnt my lesson by stop dilly-dallying and providing maximum yap and getting on to the predictions. So who do I reckon is going to be the winner of the Belgian Grand Prix? Well, I'm probably going to say it will be a McLaren driver, and I reckon it will be Oscar Piastri. Yes, I know what you're going to say. I'm biased, and that I should be thinking that Lando will win the Belgian Grand Prix, but it's going to be a close one. I mentioned earlier that team orders might come into play here. It will happen again, and here's hoping the McLaren will handle it a lot better, because they can't make it any worse. Put simply, I think Oscar will be really fired up to justify that the Hungarian Grand Prix was not gifted to him just for the sake that he was ahead of everyone after the second pit stop, and to prove that McLaren had absolutely no flexibility when it comes to their pit stop strategies, which in a way they kind of did because they still gave Norris the undercut. But regardless, he is going to be motivated at a track where he seriously impressed last time out. He was mighty here, and people suddenly started to take notice of him and go, "Oh, that Australian's pretty quick, ain't he?" And then he went after Max, and Max didn't crash into him, and he didn't crash into Max, and then, okay, then he crashed into Carlos, which is a bit random, but okay, whatever. Again, it's just a shame that we didn't get to see him over a whole race distance, but I feel like after Hungary, he's managed to get a handle on what he can do regarding tyre management, because, as Ted Kravitz said, his management throughout that race was perfect. And yes, you might be able to argue and quibble that, oh, he was only like that because he had clear air. Well, that's the point. McLaren were on the front row. Of course they were going to have clear air. And that would benefit any car, up and down, and whoever the driver will be. So if Oscar can do what he did in the sprint last year and get a front row position, and then get into turn one, because that seems to be his style, going as tight into turn one as possible, then he might be able to lead from the front and go from there. Yes, this might lead into debate about who will actually get the position, considering that Verstappen is handicapped regarding his grid slot, and maybe he might not get in the top 5 or not get on the podium, because there is the concertina effect, but I'll talk about that in a moment. But I do feel like ultimately Lando Norris will be the one in second place. But this is one that's going to be really, really close to call. This could be within a couple of seconds. It could change from one driver to the other, but it is McLaren's race to lose. And depending on who's good on the day, or who had their Weetabix, or who didn't stay up late because Max, naughty boy, it could go to either driver, because right now they are going to want to redress the balance that Oscar responded to and show that who is the better driver, and that Norris is the lead guy that McLaren can get behind, instead of starting to see doubt, because the whole antics of Norris about not giving the place back or not sticking to his guns at all, it was sort of dithering on whatever happened. This is just going to make McLaren question Norris and whether or not it would happen again. And now Norris is going to make a decision about what he will do and how he wants to be remembered. But this is a serious question, because McLaren will be paying attention to what Verstappen does up and down the grid. And if, say, Verstappen doesn't get into the top 10, he gets stuck in the bottom end of the grid, then it might not matter so much. If Oscar gets ahead and he's convincing, he might get to keep the win. But then again, it just depends on how close they are. It's really, really close to call. I know I keep repeating it, but it really is. Mercedes can't light a candle to them at the moment, and McLaren thought that Hamilton could get them, but they didn't. And then Verstappen wasn't even able to get close, and he had his Mardy with Hamilton. I think McLaren have got a slight case of imposter syndrome, and I think these two drivers need to realise that they are the front-running drivers and that they can go for wins fairly regularly now. McLaren are not in that period of their history anymore. But then again, this prediction could be thrown into question if McLaren doesn't have a track-specific upgrade, or to deal with the fact their car is pretty draggy because, long straights and whatnot. Then, in terms of third place, I think it might be the same that we saw at Hungary, that it'll be Lewis Hamilton in third place again. Because, as I touched upon earlier, Mercedes are going to be bringing yet another upgrade to this track, and it probably might not be a big visible difference to what we saw come Silverstone, but I think it will be something that can give them that little bit extra. And they'll be motivated by the fact that these upgrades have been consistent in improvement and have been fairly decent. And also, it's going to be a fair bit cooler. The weather will be really, really crucial here as to how good Hamilton and Russell will be. The predictions are saying that it's going to be at best 24 degrees, which is okay. It's going to be overcast, which is good in terms of track temperature, and there's even a chance of rain. It's about 30% as of the time of recording this video, so rain could happen. It can happen at a moment's notice. The spirit and the desire to win is back. And you might be thinking that I'm only saying this because of British bias, but it's very clear that Lewis is really motivated when things are going his way, like pretty much most drivers. We might see some real fireworks if things are going really well for them, the upgrade works, cooler temperatures come into play, but I think even then, he is able to defend against Max Verstappen. And this might happen again here, and it might relegate Max Verstappen to 4th place. I know, a bit of a shocker. You might be thinking, no way, man. Max Verstappen in the last couple of years has come from 14th, from 6th place, to go on and win the race. 4th? Really? Well, the difference is, my friend, is that the RB18 and 19 respectively were absolute beasts when it came to the Belgian Grand Prix by the time that car was developed to the point where we get to this race. You just get the sense that Red Bull knew that this was going to happen. They were expecting an engine penalty. They decided to take it here because they know that Max is good here. This is one of his best tracks. Yeah, sure, they can take the hit in the new internal combustion engine, and Max might be able to get the performance done anyway. He might even go on to win. I could be wrong, but I do feel like it is going to be more difficult than is to be expected, because it's just not as good, the RB20, as the RB19. And the concertina effect of being down in 11th place at best, he might be even worse. He might be 13th or something like that. There might be other drivers who are out of position, depends on what happens in terms of weather on the Saturday. Because as I said, Spa, it could easily rain without people predicting it. By the time you get to the end of the first lap, Max might be 8 or 9 seconds down the road from Piastri and Norris or whoever's in front. So to try and take them out in the pit lane, to try and win, that would be really difficult unless there is a safety car, which can happen. There's always the safety car. I think he will be glad to take a break from Formula One and actually get to do some sim racing for fun and enjoyment and really start to really think about what his situation is at Red Bull. And no, I don't think a switch to Mercedes next year is on the cards. It's not going to. He's not going to drop Red Bull this quickly. But then again, I just still can't get over the fact that Red Bull seemed really, really keen to blame video games and Max for their own problems. So that's something to think about. And I know that Checo's got problems at the moment, and he's probably not destined to be at Red Bull for much longer. But if he is going to go down, then he might go down swinging at the Belgian Grand Prix and finish behind Max in 5th place. Because for him, in the Red Bull, this is a really good track. The last couple of years, he's been 2nd place. 2022, 2023, he's been right behind Max. It was a 1-2 for Red Bull, and I feel like he might do well here. Sure, it might not be on the podium. It really depends on how he does in qualifying. If he can get into Q3, then he might actually figure. He might actually be a fly in the ointment for Mercedes and McLaren. He might be able to do the deed. But do not expect him to be in front of Max. He will be told to let Max through. And right now, considering that they are going to be having discussions, Marco and Horner, in London during the week after the Belgian Grand Prix to discuss Checo's future, he will not want to stoke the fire of either party. So he will do what they say and let Max through. But I do think he has what it takes to stave off George Russell for the top 5. And yeah, he's going to be mighty. He might have a Kevin Magnussen laissez-faire attitude that, yeah, okay, I might not be here much longer. This could be my last race if I'm dropped, and I don't take up the Racing Bull spot in favor of Daniel or whoever. So, you know what? I'm going to show that I'm worth it. Oh, okay. If that does happen and he knows that his time is limited, maybe he might go down defiantly and not be the support that Max wants him, because Max, Brazil, you know, after what Checo did in 2021 for him, Checo is a legend. Oh, okay. That might be something to pay attention to. Yeah, okay. I know it's silly. I know. I'm not manifesting for it to happen. But the fact is, though, the odds are stacked against Checo at the moment because, sure, he's not 8th place in the championship. That could have happened had George Russell not been out of position in Hungary. But having said that, 7th place in the championship is still not anything to write home about. And they've all got to pay attention to what's been going on with Yuki, because even though Daniel Ricciardo's looking likely to take the seat from Checo when we come back to racing in Zandvoort, I do think that Yuki has got a case, and you know, if Daniel Kvyat can get a slot, then why can't Yuki? And the punchiness is really real here in this video that you can go and watch right now. So, yeah, strap yourself in, folks. It's going to be a bumpy ride for anyone who's a Red Bull fan. Woo!